One of the most common questions I've received over the past almost 10 years is, Matt, why can't I get off Suboxone? I've tried, it's been too hard, or I've been able to get off successfully only to get back on because I still didn't feel good. I still had depression. I still had low energy. So, in this video, I put together 25 potential reasons as to why a person could still be on Suboxone even though they'd very much like to be off of the medicine. And so, as we go through these 25 different potential reasons, what you can do is notice yourself in this list and see how many of these 25 that you resonate with and to what degree do you resonate with those. Some of these are not going to pertain to you at all, while some of the other ones might have your name written all over it. And this is no type of judgment, no type of shame for anyone. It's just a matter of where each person is at in life, and also to know that regardless of where any person is, that they can actually make action plans and progress and take baby steps to get going, get momentum, and then really get off this medicine in a very holistic and effective way. It's not the easiest thing in the whole world to do for most people, unfortunately. Suboxone, while it's a partial opioid agonist, as is Subutex, anything with buprenorphine is the main ingredient. It may be a partial opioid agonist and not a full one, but as most people have felt, not everybody, but some people just come right off of these medicines, typically when they're young, maybe like a 23-year-old that's been on it for 3 months or 6 months. Imagine how much easier it would be for that person to quit Suboxone than someone that's 65 years old that's been on it for 10 years, that has mental and physical underlying health issues and has a lot of stress in life. So those are going to be two completely different situations, and probably going to be the older person with the substantial, physical mental decline that has been on it for 10 years versus 3 or 6 months. Obviously, that's probably going to be much more difficult. So again, this is no judgment for anyone. This is a clarity enhancing video. This is for people. I really tried to get very detailed, and I asked source or spirit or God, whatever you want to call it. I prayed actually to say, okay, how can I create this video so good that it really hits home for everyone that needs to see it, to get, literally 25 different things. As soon as I started to brainstorm, before I was not blocked, but it wasn't flowing quickly. As soon as I surrendered it over and just asked God or spirit, whatever you want to call it, to flow through me to make the stuff come out. Oh man, my I was shaving and showering and I was getting so many ideas that were being put into my head, to my soul. And then as soon as I got on the notepad, they just started to come out. Oh, and then I started to add to some of them and make them more specific. So without further ado, let's get right into this video and we'll see where it goes and what stories and anecdotes and metaphors come out of me while I'm explaining these 25 different topics. Feel free to post a comment or any questions as these 25 as we're going through this list. You could even comment on, oh, number 16, I resonate with that one. Oh, number 12, that's me all to the total degree. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. That's so me. And that way we can start to build a community just for this one video, and people can go and read other people's responses and learn from that. People are free to and welcome to interact with each other, give each other reinforcement, support, maybe what worked for them, exchange ideas. And that way there's a sense of support. It adds to the educational quality of the information and the different anecdotes versus for people's particular vantage points and experiences. So it should be a lot of fun. Number one is withdrawal symptoms, just plain and simple. Physical symptoms and psychological symptoms from either tapering off of Suboxone or going through a cold turkey detox off Suboxone, which are typically much worse symptoms. At least with tapering, the slower a person goes, typically the less severe the withdrawal symptoms are. But for some people that have been on it for a long time, or that their body, their constitution, their mental health is not in a great place, and we're going to get much deeper into a lot of these. Even for a lot of people, tapering down below a certain point for them becomes too difficult. The withdrawal symptoms are bad already, and they're not even completely off the medicine. So again, the title and topic of this video is, why can't I get off Suboxone? There's so many different people around the United States and other countries where this is prescribed that are on the medicine, and they no longer wish that they were on it. If they could wake up tomorrow and wave a magic wand, or rub a lamp that has a magic genie, make a wish, and their wish would be to wake up the next morning and be totally off Suboxone, no residue of it left in their body and brain, and they actually feel normal again, feel good normally without that medicine. So, coming up with this list, I was thinking, why are so many people that want to be off the medicine completely still on it? Oh boy, one of the main symptoms, and again, these are in no particular order whatsoever. It can be so subjective for people as well. But, withdrawal symptoms, those can come. The way withdrawal symptoms come about is physiological dependence means that the buprenorphine in your blood opioid concentration in your mu opioid receptors, you have a certain dependence level, physical dependence. And that just means that your neurons have adapted to the presence of buprenorphine. Some people have a neuronal adaptations point of 2 milligrams of buprenorphine. Some people zero point 0.2 milligrams. Some people, they're taking 16 or 24 or 32 milligrams. So withdrawal symptoms come about when we start to lower our blood opioid concentration of these opioid molecules, in this case, buprenorphine. And so if you imagine going through a cold turkey Suboxone detox, that would be that you wake up the next morning, you discontinue taking the medicine cold turkey. It's an abrupt cessation off the medicine. Well, within a day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, somewhere within a few days, typically, withdrawal symptoms are going to start to get severe for most people. And that's the result of the blood opioid concentration dipping down far below the state of neuronal adaptation dependence that your neurons have literally grown accustomed to, and they can only function normally in the presence of that exact amount or close to that exact amount of buprenorphine or some other type of opioid. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the synergistic aspect of both physical and psychological withdrawal symptoms. Then we'll move on to the next one. So, my belief is this: if there was no psychological symptoms that occurred from tapering off or detoxing off Suboxone, I think so many more people would have great success in their either first attempt or second attempt. It just seems to me, at least, that it would be a lot less difficult of a overall challenge if the only symptoms people experienced were physical symptoms, but with no mental health stuff going on. By that, I mean anxiousness, depression, apathy, anhedonia, pleasure deafness, these mood swings, just feeling flat or feeling way over emotional. There is such a host of different psychological symptoms that typically there's not one, there's multiple. And then on those multiple symptoms, those can compound each other. And then you mix that with physical symptoms like restless legs and insomnia and stomach cramping and perhaps diarrhea, lack of appetite. Oh, it's so brutal. It's just brutal. Only a person that has come off of Suboxone or other types of opioids will typically know exactly what this feels like. All right, so now that we've covered number one, the withdrawal symptoms, physical and psychological, plus the synergy, we move on to number two. And this is just responsibilities, plain and simple. When people have to continue to go to work or continue to grow in their career or continue to run a business or multiple businesses, when they have to raise children, maybe even children and grandchildren, when they have to continue taking care of the domestic duties around the home, cooking, shopping, cleaning, laundry, paying bills. Maybe they have appointments coming up. Some people are even in school. There's a lot of different responsibilities. And at least here in the United States, oh boy, the culture here is just so fast paced, very, very fast paced. People work a lot. People don't take a lot of time off. The majority of citizens by far don't even have the money to be able to just go on a really nice vacation that they'd like. For a huge percentage of the population, they take maybe 1 or 2 weeks off a year from work and responsibilities, and that's about it. And a lot of people don't even do that. So I was only able to get off all opioids permanently, all the opioid addiction, the pills, the heroin, the Suboxone. I was only able to do that successfully this last time, almost 10 years ago, for many different reasons. But one of the main ones was I had very little responsibilities. In fact, almost zero. I had in a 4-week period, I had a month off of school. I was actually going to school to be a drug and alcohol counselor. And the first month of school, I was smoking heroin before class and after class and all the rest of the day. So it was like really, really incongruent and inauthentic and not with integrity or anything. But hey, that's where my consciousness and that's where my, self-centeredness and everything, that's where I was back then. And that's okay. That was a part of the process. The key is to not make mistakes. The key is to learn quickly from mistakes and hopefully course correct so we don't keep making them over and over. But again, I had 4 weeks off with no school. We were on winter break. I was unemployed at the time, and I was living with my parents at the age of 32. And I had a toddler that was a little girl. She wasn't even 2 years old at that point. My parents worked from home. They knew that I was detoxing. They fully supported me through it. And so having them, I didn't have any bills I had to pay. I didn't have any school. I didn't have any work. They were helping out a lot with the childcare, thank goodness. And I just didn't have hardly any stressors at all. So during that month, I was really able to detox, relax, avoid the world, go for walks in the evenings. I went to daily AA meetings for that first month. I had comfort medicines. Eventually, I ended up getting some awesome supplements by total serendipity. But I guarantee one of the top reasons that so many people that are on Suboxone who would much prefer to not be on Suboxone, this is the top reason or one of the top 3 or 4 reasons while they're still on the medicine. It's this never ending day to day, week to week, month to month, year after year responsibilities. Again, work, childcare, domestic duties, appointments, school. Some people are volunteering, helping to raise their kids, so their grandkids. There's just a seeming never-ending list of responsibilities and paying bills and paying taxes and keeping up with the mask and pandemic mandates. I mean, there's a lot of shit going on right now. This is like a crazy time in the world, and so a lot of people have used this time at the beginning of the pandemic when people had to stay home. Oh man, that I remember so many people detoxing during that time, and we were Chris and I, my co-host on the Elevation Recovery podcast. We were doing episodes on, man, this is like such a great time for a lot of people, not for everyone, but for many different people. The start of the pandemic, those first couple of months, they finally got the break from responsibilities that they had been wishing and dreaming for months or more often years, and for some people more than a decade. So this is a huge one. These are two huge ones. It's no wonder why they're at the top. And again, these are in no particular order, but as you'll see, some of these ones at the top, these are serious ones. These are not minor. You know, being stuck on Suboxone when someone would rather not be. Yeah, withdrawal symptoms, that's going to be a fear and a possibility for everyone. And responsibilities getting in the way of the process of coming all the way off and getting through that period when it can be quite hard on your body and brain and mind and even on your spirit. So, okay, I think I've done a good enough job on that one. And then we'll go to number 3. Number 3 is distress tolerance not being high enough. So distress tolerance is really exactly how it sounds. It's someone's ability to tolerate distress. There's 2 types of stress. There's distress, which is, the one that we don't like how it feels. It's kind of this negative stress with a negative spin on it. We're doing a bunch of stuff and having to do a bunch of stuff, and it's hurting us in physical and mental ways, and we'd rather not be doing it or rather not be having so much of these things to do. Then there's eustress, which is like positive stress. So that's like when I'm preparing a video series and trying to block out the time for it and come up with ideas. If I'm already doing a bunch of other stuff in life with business and my personal and family life, well, that can cause some eustress. In the back in the day, it used to cause a lot of distress because I hadn't learned how to reframe it as this very positive stress. So, one of the reasons that I was not able to quit my alcohol addiction quick, or my benzo addiction quick, or my opioid addiction quick, or a bunch of my other ones back in the day, there was a lot. I didn't have a high distress tolerance back then. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even say my distress tolerance present day, almost 10 years off addiction, I wouldn't even say that I've got an exceptionally high distress tolerance nowadays. I really don't think it's super high. Now, it's a lot higher than it was back then, way higher. And it's even a lot higher than it was probably 2 years ago. So it's getting higher, but I think I'm just wired that way. I have a innate trait called sensory processing sensitivity, also known as SPS or HSP, the highly sensitive person trait. I won't tell too much about it because that's actually one of the topics on here. But that just means that our brains, people with this trait, our brains, we have a faster cognitive processing speed of sensory stimuli, and so I can get distressed a lot easier than a good portion of people that don't have this trait. Of course, there's so many other factors and variables that go into distress tolerance and how we're able to cope. But, a good role model for this is people like David Goggins and Jocko Willink. These are both ex Navy SEALs that are quite popular online. And just, their content that they create, talking about, stories from their past and even looking at how they currently live on a day to day basis. These gentlemen, these ex Navy SEALs, and they were like high up in the Navy SEALs and served a long time, their distress tolerance is gigantic, even to become a Navy SEAL, but not to mention all the stuff you do once you get into that career. But to go through the BUDS training, oh my gosh, that is another level of distress tolerance. And some people like enjoyed the process of it, just loved all the distress coming in. They just like keep feeding it to me, keep feeding it to me. So yeah, that's a huge one. Again, that was number three. A lot of people are still on Suboxone and would rather not be. And one of the reasons, and there's probably many for every person, there's probably multiple reasons. But a lot of people, their distress tolerance is not high enough. It might have been high enough in the past, but after someone's been on it for 7 or 8 years or 14 years, perhaps their body and brain and they've had such long-term side effects. It debilitates the endocrine system. It causes dopamine and endorphin deficiency without the medicine. After you've been taking it for a while, you can no longer create dopamine and endorphin and enkephalin, these mood boosting neurochemicals that we normally create naturally. Once opioids in general hijack our receptors, then we need these drugs on a daily basis. Otherwise, we're not going to have dopamine or endorphins, just to name a few. And lack of these big time deficiencies of these neurochemicals, they create a plethora of psychological and physical symptoms that can be debilitating in many cases. Number 4 and 5 kinda go together. At least that's the way that I have formed it up in my own mental model of how this all works. But number 4 is intrinsic motivation to quit, and specifically, not having enough intrinsic or internal motivation to quit. So I often ask people, what would you say your consistent level of motivation, self-motivation to get off and stay off Suboxone is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest? A lot of people will say, a 6 on some days, a 3 on other days, a 10 on a lot of days. So, with that type of ambiguity regarding how it's so not consistent, well, that type of ambiguity regarding motivation levels, if it's just cycling all over, up and down, depending on how a person's feeling that day, depending on how stressful their life is, so that can keep people stuck on Suboxone for long, long, long after they want to get off. A lot of people will be like, "Well, I really want to get off this stuff." but it's just not a 10 out of 10 on a daily basis. And that's fine. People are, that's just where they're at. What if it's not a 10 out of 10? Typically, people are still getting, a decent amount of benefits from it. There could be bad side effects or bad long term side effects, but, there's, the pain and suffering of what they know, what's familiar, even though it sucks. The thought of having to detox off the medicine, go through that process, and then not be on the medicine that they've grown accustomed to. So that sounds, for a lot of people, even more painful. And so a lot of times people will just stay on it. Uh, for one of the reasons is that they just don't have that 10 out of 10 steady levels of motivation. When someone has a daily 24/7, 10 out of 10 motivation, I want to get off this stuff. Usually that's because they have a lot of self belief. They believe that they have the ability to do it. Where a person's beliefs are like their belief processes and their belief systems, a lot of people will have limiting beliefs. We're going to cover that in one of the upcoming parts of this training. But yeah, and the next one's leverage. So that'd be number five, not enough leverage. And here's how I believe that four and five go together. When I was on opioids and towards the end of my addiction, I was just on basically heroin. On some days when I couldn't get heroin, black tar heroin that came across the border here to San Diego from Mexico, this black tar heroin, I was smoking it off aluminum foil, chasing the dragon. Some days I wasn't able to get that. And on those days, hopefully, I was able to find some prescription opiate pills I could buy black market, because I didn't want to get sick and go through the withdrawal. But the last 6 months, primarily, I was smoking around 1 to 2 grams of heroin per day. Some days I could only afford to smoke a half gram. It was one of the worst. That was probably actually the either the worst, 6 months of my life or very close to it. It was awful. And I put myself in that situation. It's nobody's fault but my own. So I had a high level of motivation to quit back then, but I didn't have a 10 out of 10 for sure. And I didn't have the self belief that I could not just do it, but stay off them, because I had a habit of getting off and getting back on, getting off and getting back on, to self medicate social anxiety and generalized anxiety, low energy, low self confidence, and other things as well. And it was only when I had that month break coming up. So I had the lack of responsibilities finally. And also my parents were very suspicious. Up until this point, they didn't even know that I was smoking heroin. They knew I was doing something. They could tell. They're not idiots, and they're really in tune with that, because I had a history with alcohol and other substance abuse. And I wasn't able to, it just seemed shady. A lot of people can sense when someone's lying, not being truthful, just through the body language. And although I had built myself into quite a good liar back then, because lying was, to me, synonymous with feeding my addiction, which was synonymous for me with literally staying alive and life itself. At that point, survival itself is what my brain linked to these opioids. So it wasn't a 10 out of 10. And, some days it would be, but I didn't have the self belief I could do it. Long story short, my dad goes through my phone when I'm passed out one afternoon, and he sees some texts between my heroin dealer and I. Then the gig was up, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my entire life, because from that point on, they knew, and then it was just a matter of time from that point on where I was going to be able to do this. They said basically, "Listen, you're living here with us, with your daughter, and we're helping you out so much. We know that you're busted now. We know you're on drugs, and if you want to continue to live here, and you want to continue to have custody of your child, you have to quit this stuff. You have to start the process of recovery." In doing that, it gave me the leverage needed to help me to boost my motivation. So here's how these two go together. I know I'm going in on a long way, but I want you to be really detailed. The lower a person's intrinsic motivation to quit Suboxone is, the higher levels of leverage needed. For example, drug court. One of the reasons drug court is successful at helping some people where they couldn't quit before on their own, then they get into drug court, and it's really hard. I've heard it's really time consuming. It totally takes over your whole entire life. I would hate to have to do that ever. But I've heard from quite a few people that said they needed the drug court. They needed that because then the court system of their state now had a lot of leverage that, hey, if you don't comply with these recovery steps, you're going to go to jail, right? You're going to go to jail or to prison, or you're going to lose custody of your child or your children. And when there's that type of leverage involved, you don't need a 10 out of 10 motivation at that point. If you've got a 5 out of 10 motivation to quit, and then someone gets a 10 out of 10 leverage against you, that might be enough in a lot of circumstances to help a person do what they really want to do, anyways. So, there's the tough love thing too that can be leverage against people. It works well for some people. Other people, it has the opposite effect. Tough love is not only is it an effective form of leverage for certain people, but tough love can actually be literally the worst thing possible for certain individuals where they just need unconditional love, especially from their family, the people that are supposed to love them unconditionally. And I know tough love is, they're still loving them, but there's boundaries. But oftentimes it doesn't always play out in the real world like the principles of the program of Al Anon and other programs like that teach. So, humans are imperfect beings, and so when people are using tough love as a form of leverage or even just as a boundary, oftentimes it's not the most effective thing. We're all different. There's no one path to recovery. There's no one path of anything in this regards when it comes to something so complex, so much more dynamic and complex than you typically hear about in the mainstream recovery modalities. And so my belief on this is each person is such a unique sovereign being that has such a unique to them, not only biochemistry, but a unique psychology, a unique personality, unique values, unique, belief systems, unique even culture and race. So depending on this huge melting pot of so many different, variables, demographics and psychographics and spirituality ideas and religion, and people come from such different belief systems and value systems. And a lot of people's consciousness is not as high as some other people. So even where a person's consciousness is, it at guilt, fear and shame a bunch, or is their consciousness at courage, acceptance and willingness on a more regular basis? Different approaches to quitting Suboxone and recovering from the medicine, they're going to resonate with different people depending on this huge, ginormous list of things. Number six is underlying mental health issues as a very top reason that a lot of people are still on Suboxone or another buprenorphine formulation or opioids in general for that matter, long after they would like to really be off because they've got an underlying disorder or multiple underlying disorders. In my own history, oh man, I had generalized anxiety that went from mild to moderate to severe depending on the phase of life and the circumstances. I had social anxiety that ranged from mild to moderate to severe depending on my circumstances during that phase of life and the people that I was being social with. That had a big part to it too. Back then, and for most of my life, come to think of it, I had social anxiety so bad that there were certain grocery stores, certain stores in general, that I was afraid to go shop at. No rhyme or reason about which ones I felt good to go shop at and which ones I was too afraid and fearful to go shop at. My social anxiety was so bad at many points, at many phases, that when I was walking down the sidewalk, going for a walk, walking somewhere, when people were walking down the sidewalk coming my same direction, I would cross the sidewalk as soon as I could, ASAP, because I didn't want to walk by them because I was afraid. This is gnarly stuff. Like, if, for people that have never lived with social anxiety disorder or the combination even of generalized and social anxiety, oh, it's just no way to live. I've been anxiety free for, approximately 2 years, maybe 2.5 years now. Yeah, that's about right. So I'm 42 years old, and it was only at about the age of 40 that I finally got rid of anxiety disorders. So now living is just, a few years ago, I would have not been able to get on video. I think the first time, maybe it was 4 years ago or something, that I first got on video and showed my face. But about 5 years ago, and leading up to that, I was only doing keynote video presentations back then that never showed my face. My social anxiety was so bad, I couldn't even like record a video of me knowing that it wasn't even going to be live, and then I could see it before I posted it, edit it if I wanted to. I mean, it's just so debilitating. Then there's other mental health disorders too. There's bipolar disorder 1, bipolar disorder 2, post traumatic stress disorder, trauma, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. There is a plethora of mental health disorders. The United States, particularly, is going through a giant or not exponential, but a giant leap increases of people having addiction issues, increase in the overdose rates, increase in mental health disorders, increase in suicidal ideation and suicide as well. And so when I look back on all the different thousands and thousands and thousands of people that I've corresponded with online since I started my first website, opiateaddictionsupport.com, in 2014, that one website has now had millions of visitors. I think at this point, more than 3 million, guaranteed over 2.5 million, and likely at this point, more than 3 million, not to mention YouTube videos. And within the past 2 years now, the Elevation Recovery podcast, which has around 220,000 downloads. And that's not even including the tens of thousands of YouTube views it has. So between all this content and being online for all these years, and also coaching a lot of people one on one, and when I first started out, uh, co- uh, counseling people that were on methadone, Suboxone, or Subutex as a certified alcohol and drug counselor at an opioid treatment program, also known as an OTP, an outpatient program with specializing in medication assisted treatment. Out of all those people that I've worked with or corresponded with, the vast majority of them have reported to me at least one mental health disorder, even if it's something like intermittent anxiety, or maybe some people have just a mild case of OCD. It's very rare, in fact, at least for the people that I've corresponded with, at least in my situation. It has been very rare where I've corresponded with someone or worked with someone that has never had any issues with anxiety or depression or anything like that. I have corresponded with them. I have talked with people like this on the phone, on Zoom sessions, Skype, FaceTime, a lot of it over email, and a lot of it over like just learning from YouTube comments and blog comments. Opiate addiction support blog. Man, I think there's more than 10,000 comments on that website because the first few years when I was doing it, my traffic was just gigantic back then. Since it has fallen drastically, 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 but that's okay. I should also say that it's not mandatory. It's not 100% needed for someone to get a complete 100% control or reversal of a mental health disorder before they're actually able to transition off of Suboxone successfully and permanently. Because when I came off of all the drugs and alcohol back then, and mostly opioids, I hadn't taken care of my anxiety disorder. I hadn't taken care of any of my mental health stuff, but I detoxed. I had a lot of loving, supportive family and friends. I had that time off. And then when I went back to school, I still wasn't working. So I was able to just, okay, I'm living with my parents, no bills except for my cell phone and gas and insurance, very minimal amount of bills. And I would do freelance work and work around the house and other things, odd jobs, to make some cash to be able to pay those bills and to buy myself some food. But ultimately, I had this nice cushion point where I could go to school, learn how to be a drug and alcohol counselor. And the side effect, the positive outcome of that for me was that not that I overcame all my anxiety and everything, but I started to learn how to counsel other people with addictions. That's what the school was for. And in doing so, it was helping me with my own addiction recovery. So I was like using the stuff that I was learning first on me, and then later on as an intern at the opioid treatment program, and then later as a full-time counselor up on the second floor with the cool view. And just, I have lots of fond memories of counseling there, being a substance abuse counselor, helping people that are on medications for opioid use disorder. A lot of it towards the end was awful. We had a new clinical director. Caseloads were huge. Counselors kept quitting or getting sick for long periods of time. The place was a cesspool of disease. And method. If you've ever been to a methadone clinic, we were a methadone clinic by day and morning, and we moonlighted as an outpatient program where most of the people in that program were on Suboxone or Subutex, and some of them were on Vivitrol, and there was even a few people here and there that weren't on any medications. So in the evening, the place was like all the Suboxone and Subutex and Vivitrol people for the most part, or no medicine. And as you can imagine, the evenings with the people that went to work all day or took care of kids all day or both, then came in when we're on these, partial opioid agonists. You can imagine how that was almost like working in a completely different clinic, even though it was in the same physical space as the morning and afternoon methadone clinic that we had open from 5:30 a.m. to, what was it, 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? 3 p.m. So that's when the dosing hours were and the counseling hours for, and maybe it was 2:30 p.m. It's been so long now, I can't even remember. But yeah, it got way too stressful, way too crazy. And ultimately, being a certified substance abuse counselor that went to school, put in thousands and thousands of hours between school, internship, and then counseling. All of that was a great stepping stone to 2014 when I started opiateaddictionsupport.com, and more recently 2 years ago Elevation Recovery. So I just went off on a huge long tangent, but yeah, 6 underlying mental health issues. I guess I stayed on it so long because this is probably one of the number one reasons why a lot of people are still on Suboxone, even though they'd rather get off. And again, for each person, there's probably several reasons. And within these different reasons on this list, varying levels of intensity. So maybe someone's got, the distress tolerance one. Yeah, they're not that high on their distress tolerance, but it's not nearly as severe as maybe not enough support, one we're coming up to soon, number 9. Maybe they have nobody in life. They're completely alone. Their family's gone and they don't have really any close friends. Man, just total isolation, no support, no emotional source of connection and love, at least through the route of other human beings. And maybe that one for them, the intensity of the not enough support is so high that that's the overall, the most powerful reason why that particular person is still stuck on Suboxone. And maybe all that person needs is just one loving, supportive family member or friend, someone that can be their confidant and support them and hold them accountable through this. Or maybe they find someone they can do a buddy system with, for example. So, yeah, there's just so much wiggle room in these varying reasons and topics as to whether they're big issues, moderate issues, or they're small issues, but issues nonetheless. So I hope this is starting to give you more clarity into all the different potential reasons why people can be stuck on Suboxone for a long time after they would prefer to be 100% off. There's lots of different factors. Each person is unique in which one of these factors or reasons applies to them and to which intensity level applies to them as well. Number 7 slightly goes with number 6. Number 7 is underlying physical issues. So number 6 was underlying mental health issues. For 7, things like physical, so chronic pain syndrome, for example, someone has chronic low back pain, or maybe they have fibromyalgia. Maybe they have chronic fatigue syndrome or multiple sclerosis. There's a lot of things that can really affect people physically. Maybe they have arthritis, or maybe their shoulder is really in pain and spasming all the time. Maybe their neck and their upper back, and sometimes their knee is hurting. So these physical health disorders, these can be a reason why people are not able to get off Suboxone or stay off Suboxone, even though they want to, because buprenorphine is a painkiller. There's even some types formulations where it's a patch, a buprenorphine patch that you can slap right on, and they use that in the treatment of pain as an alternative to RX pills. And it can always be tricky when somebody is wanting to come off Suboxone or another buprenorphine formulation when they have unresolved underlying chronic pain issues. Why? Well, one of the reasons is when people are typically tapering off or detoxing off Suboxone, the less endorphins and dopamine they have as a result of coming off this medicine, that can make pain go worse. If you have less endorphins, those are our painkillers that we create in our body. And when we're taking a buprenorphine formulation, if that is reducing pain because it's an opioid, then we take away that painkiller that we've been using. That's not only going to stop covering up and masking the pain to whatever extent it was doing that, that can also exacerbate underlying pain issues, at least temporarily. It's not going to do this permanently for somebody, but at least for, unless somebody's done a really good job, a long, drawn out, slow taper where they're exercising, eating well, they have support and accountability, and they're doing personal development and all sorts of things they could be doing. Maybe that person doesn't feel any extra pain coming off, even though they've had lots of issues with pain in the past. But what I've found is that a lot of people, they have to go through an initial point of detoxing off of Suboxone or whatever other opioid they're on, and then getting through the healing process. And then once everything is kind of balanced once again, from that point, kind of doing a self assessment of where their pain is at. Kind of like, okay, let me clean myself out of what I've been using, get totally opioid free and healed from it, at least enough to where somebody can get a gauge, a mostly accurate gauge of where their current pain level at this new point is at. So, yeah, underlying, and some people have a combination of underlying mental health disorder or more, one or more, and an underlying physical health issue, one or more of those. So, say somebody has a mild generalized anxiety disorder, a moderate chronic pain syndrome, and they also have chronic fatigue, moderately. Oh man, that's going to make the process of transitioning off Suboxone and getting back to normal, that's going to probably make it more difficult than a person that has zero mental health issues and zero physical health issues. And literally, the only thing they need to be working on is getting off the medicine and becoming medication free. Now we've reached number 8 and number 9, and I believe these two can be tied together as well. Number 8 is not having enough accountability, and number 9 is not having enough support. And oftentimes, these are kind of a combination. I'll give you an example again from my own life. Before, when I was hiding my opioid addiction from my family and from my other loved ones and friends, I didn't have to be accountable to anybody because nobody knew that I was on anything. So even when I set these goals for myself of, okay, when I have this 3-day weekend coming up in 2 weeks, I'm going to get some Imodium AD and I'm going to try and, go get some Valium or some other type of benzo from someone. And I'm going to have this 3-day weekend. I'm going to try to do this all on my own. A lot of times when it came time to that 3-day weekend or 2-day weekend, or whenever the time period was, since nobody else knew that that was my goal to detox that specific weekend, that week, since nobody knew except for me, guess how easy it was for me to say, this isn't the best weekend. I can do it next week, or, a month will be a much better time. And that very, very well may have been true. Might have been easier if I had, 1 month in the future for whatever reason. But a lot of times I was just rationalizing. It was denial, it was self delusion. And so I didn't have any accountability from anybody because nobody knew. I also didn't have any support, emotional support, other types of support, practical support. I didn't have any of that either because, again, nobody knew. It was my dirty little secret that was keeping me sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. So there's so much healing power in the truth and in surrendering, or, just really just, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get accountability, meaning you have at least one person that knows your situation, that is understanding and compassionate about it, that will help to hold you accountable. They know what you're going through and they know your goals regarding timelines and everything. And they also give you support. One of my favorite quotes is that accountability is the glue that ties commitment to results. If you're committed to doing something, but you don't have anybody to be accountable to, oh man, that commitment's not going to be anywhere near as effective and efficacious and powerful is when you tie together, when you get that synergistic combination of commitment and that resolve that I want to do this, and you multiply that with accountability and support, woo, exponentially increases success rates. At least from what I've seen out there, uh, if I had to guess, having effective accountability and support when you're going through the process of coming off Suboxone completely and permanently, I would say that it's probably has to increase success rates by at least 8 times, if not 10 times or more. Uh, I haven't seen people that don't have any accountability or support quit Suboxone or quit other opioids in general for that matter at nearly even close to the same success rates as I've seen people transition off these medicines for good, uh, where they actually have the accountability and they have the support. A lot of times it's a loving, compassionate spouse. That's the most often, at least that I've seen. And gosh, that support and that accountability from a spouse or boyfriend or a girlfriend or a close friend or a counselor or a coach or a therapist or a 12-step group or a smart recovery group. There's so many different types of accountability and support. They usually come as a package deal. Usually, um, at least accountability, there's usually support. Maybe you can have support that's not also an effective form of accountability. That's the other thing with accountability is what works for one person to help them remain accountable won't necessarily work for everyone. As a matter of fact, it probably won't work for a lot of people. So, kind of gauging exactly what you need, you can do this process of deep breathing, maybe put some relaxing music on. If you don't currently have support or accountability, just start freestyling in a journal or digitally somehow, and just start going like, what is the support and accountability that I can get that resonates with me and that makes a lot of sense for my individual, very unique situation? And then start listing the ways. I've already mentioned, a bunch of them. 12-step groups, Celebrate Recovery, which is the faith-based one, very high success rates when you get the power of God in it. People that go to the faith-based ones seem to have really high recovery rates. They seem to be very helpful at accountability and support and getting people to, they're basically learning how to live in the teachings of Jesus Christ, which is, that's a very peaceful, surrendering, loving way to live. And when you combine that with a group of people that are going through the same process and group leaders and sometimes counselors in that case, that works very well for some people. But guess what? The faith based recovery support groups, they're like horribly effective, not effective at all for certain people. They just don't have that same belief system, which is totally fine. Maybe for this particular example, the person loves the idea of smart recovery groups, which is self-management and recovery training. It is not spirituality or religious based or anything like that. There's no talk of higher power, so maybe some people would resonate more with that. Other people, they don't even want to tell anyone in their family because they just know their family, and they know their family would judge, maybe because of their background. Maybe they're ignorant on addiction and how it's not actually a moral failing, but something much more out of the person's control, when the prefrontal cortex has become so much eroded from the drug use, and when the midbrain has often become hijacked by the drug. So it's like driving a car without brakes. When your midbrain's hijacked for the substance, wired to get the substance, it's like having your foot on the accelerator. And when your prefrontal cortex part of our new brain, our more developed brain, when that functioning is eroded and when it's not all the way online, and maybe a lot offline, disabled in a lot of parts, That is the brakes, and it's like our brakes have gone out. So our foot's on the accelerator, the brakes are out. So if people that are our family and friends, if they don't understand just what addiction does to rewire the brain and how it literally hijacks a lot of our free will that we had before addiction, and then it becomes a much more obsessive compulsive process, this addictive process. People can be very judgmental if they don't know this stuff. If they look at it as addiction's a moral failing, it's a sign of no moral fiber, and you have low integrity and low values and low morals. Well, yeah, no wonder a lot of people don't feel comfortable at all telling their loved ones or telling even one loved one. And no wonder they're looking for other sources of accountability and support. I've corresponded with a ton of people that was their situation, and they wanted to like either work with a therapist or a counselor at an outpatient program or an inpatient program or some type of coach, holistic coach or addiction coach. There's a lot of different professionals and even peers. There's a lot of different peers. A lot of people go to NA groups or AA groups and they get a sponsor. I mean, imagine all the support and accountability you get at these types of 12 step groups if that's something that resonates with that particular person. Those groups don't resonate with everyone, because it just goes back to that same tenet we'll keep coming back to. Many paths to recovery. There's no really wrong way to do it if you're not hurting anyone else or like hurting yourself and it's working for you, then that's just what's resonating with you at the value level, at the belief system level, and maybe even at the soul level. Number 10 is that a person's Suboxone prescriber is not a board certified addiction medicine physician. A lot of times people will know how to prescribe Suboxone. They'll know how to prescribe Subutex. You have to go through, I think it's a 1 day training. It's somewhere between 4 and 8 hours, I believe. There's a special type of certification that a doctor needs to go through to be able to prescribe buprenorphine formulations. I know there's been a lot of back and forth recently, probably in the past, 6 to 8 months, somewhere around there, where they're trying to get it to where no doctors at all need to do this special certification to where now all physicians, all MDs can prescribe buprenorphine formulations. So I'm not sure where this is at right now. It looked like at the end of the Trump administration, they had made it right at the very end, they had made it to where they waived that certification to where any physician in America could prescribe buprenorphine formulations, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because if they can prescribe Oxycontin, if they can prescribe Opana and fentanyl lollipops, all these full opioid agonists, why can't they prescribe a partial opioid agonist that is less addictive and much safer? Then, when the Biden administration came in, they overturned that, and they're like, "No, we're overturning this right away." So that never went through. And then since then, I swear it might have flip flopped another time or two. So I'm not sure where it's at, but a lot of people, their doctors know how to prescribe buprenorphine formulations like Suboxone. They know how to do an intake. They know how to do a Suboxone induction, how to train the person on how long to wait after their last dose of their particular opioid or opioids they're taking. So, a lot of these doctors prescribing Suboxone, they're really good at prescribing it, at helping people to break the chains of active opioid addiction with this replacement medication. It's got the slow onset, slow offset. It blocks the buprenorphine, blocks the effects of other opioids and full opioid agonists, even if there's adequate supply of the buprenorphine in the mu opioid receptors. However, when it comes to helping people to either taper or detox off of Suboxone, unfortunately, if somebody is not board certified in addiction medicine, if this isn't not only a specialty in medicine of theirs, and they're also not passionate about it, there's only, unfortunately, there's only so much help they can actually offer. Doctors traditionally, even going through all that medical school, all that internship, they they spend very little time learning about addiction, and they spend very little time learning about drug withdrawal and very little time on nutrition and lifestyle strategies like this. There's nothing wrong with that at all. There's a great purpose for them. We got a lot of great doctors. But when it comes to two people that are both wanting to get off Suboxone, oftentimes the person that their buprenorphine prescriber is board certified in addiction medicine. Usually that type of a specialty doctor is going to have a lot more education and input and strategies and tactics and you know protocols, detox protocols for tapering off of Suboxone, for detoxing off of it. Two of the best addiction medicine doctors that I know, I'm personally friends and colleagues with one of them. That's Dr. Ken Starr, who owns and operates. He's the founder of Ken Starr MD Wellness Group. That's in Arroyo Grande here in California, where I live. I live in Southern California. His clinic, his outpatient treatment program, is in Central California, pretty close to San Luis Obispo. Dr. Ken Starr is twice board certified in addiction medicine. He has the longest running NAD infusion therapy detox protocols on the whole entire West Coast. He was trained personally by Dick Madier, the main doctor at Springfield Wellness Center in Louisiana, where they do brain restoration therapy as a form of Suboxone detox and Subutex detox and methadone detox. So Dr. Starr at his facility, again, he's twice board certified in addiction medicine. They got a really beautiful outpatient treatment program. They have like intensive outpatient with counseling and all that kind of stuff that goes with it and group therapy. He also has a supplement store there that's some of his brand of supplements and a lot of other supplements that, they're not his brand at all, but he just loves them. I've tried many of the supplements at that website. What is it? I think it's getcleansupplements.com. And, some of those are ones that I literally don't even want to live without anymore, like Neuro Restore, the real NAD Easy Melts. I'm really looking forward to trying his supplement called Rest. And I've tried several others too. Another addiction medicine physician that prescribes Suboxone. Oh, backing up, Dr. Starr also prescribes Suboxone, other buprenorphine formulations, and he helps people to, use these medicines, Suboxone and other medicines, to break their chains of opioid addiction, then to help them either taper off if that's what they want to do, or how to get them set up for success in Suboxone maintenance therapy, which instead of detoxing off over the span of, a couple weeks or something or a couple months, they're doing it for maybe 6 months to a year or even longer, even a few years longer, maybe even further than that. Each situation, each person is at where they're at. And so Dr. Starr is one of those physicians. He meets people where they're at. He's brilliant when it comes to his addiction medicine, detox protocols for opioids, alcohol, and benzos. Those are his three main specialties. They got the NSS2 bridge device for detox there, NAD infusion therapy, ketamine infusion therapy, just wellness shots, injections of nutrients, IV nutrients. Trying to think what else they have there. I think I've covered most of the main aspects, but yeah, really cool addiction detox and tapering protocols. Another doctor that I know is absolutely phenomenal. His YouTube channel is growing like crazy. He's got a gigantic TikTok channel. His name is Dr. B. And so if you look for him on YouTube, it's under Dr. B Addiction Recovery. I'm pretty sure that's the name on TikTok as well. And he creates videos after videos and, these podcasts, these live podcasts where there's a group chat going on and they're answering questions. Dr. B and his co-host, who I believe he's got a lot of certifications in alcohol and drug counseling. He's been doing it for a long time. I forget his name, but man, the combination of them is really dynamic, really powerful. They're so compassionate. And so that just shows you, like, when you have an addiction medicine physician that knows their shit, they're going to be able to help you to get off of Suboxone. If you just have a regular doctor that doesn't know too much about addiction, then, that's just, they're probably not going to be a whole lot of help. I could be wrong. I'm sure there's some doctors out there that have no board certification whatsoever in addiction, yet they still know how to help people quite well. It's just not very super common. Reason number 11 is that the person simply doesn't know how to taper off or how to detox off Suboxone, or what they've learned or what they've used or what they've heard about, for example, has not worked for them, or they don't believe it'll work for them personally, or they do believe it could work, but believe it'll be much too difficult for them personally. And it goes with their beliefs, which we're going to come up to. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm making this training series is a lot of people simply do not know an effective protocol for coming off of their situation on Suboxone or their situation on Subutex or their situation on Zubsolv or Sublocade or buprenorphine, the generic. And so this can also go back to who's actually prescribing their medication. For people where their doctors are just kind of clueless, they know how to prescribe it, they know how to help people, get on it and, stabilize and stuff and break free of addiction, but then they don't necessarily know how to help them through potentially a very difficult process of tapering off or detoxing off. And so a lot of times if your doctor doesn't know too much about it, well, then you might be screwed unless you're some type of analytical person that just loves to spend a lot of their free time learning about all this stuff online, in books, wherever. But also, when it comes to learning online, there's a lot of kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Different types of advice that maybe can contradict each other. And so, differing opinions, lots of horror stories. Oh, just look online if you want to get discouraged about your ability to quit Suboxone. Yeah, there's some great success stories. There's also some great tips. There's plenty of great information. Unfortunately, there's also some bad information. There's some stuff where it seems very scary. Now, the important thing to remember when you're looking at all this info online and when you're listening to any other person is that just because one person had a really bad experience, that doesn't mean that Suboxone is horrible and no one should get on it. That doesn't mean that it's going to be really hard and just super difficult for everyone. No way. It's a very limiting belief for a person to think that their experience on Suboxone, their experience transitioning off Suboxone and going through withdrawal symptoms, for example, that's the one experience that everyone else is going to have or something close to it. There is a lot of different scenarios. And so, yeah, that's a pretty big reason for quite a few people that they're still on Suboxone or still on another medication like this. They simply either don't know what to do, or they've learned a lot of things to do or some things that they can do, but they just aren't sure that it's going to be effective for them. And like we talked about before, the pain and the suffering of the situation that they're in already and that they've been living through and that they're familiar with, and even in a sick kind of sense, like comfortable with, like it's very uncomfortable. But when you're used to something, that can be easy for people to stay in that situation versus trading that in for another uncomfortable situation that they're not certain about, that's going to be a lot of change, and they're not even sure what the ultimate outcome will be. So they keep kicking the can down the road, no one holding them accountable, maybe. And then it's just, as you can see, as we're going through this long, extensive list, you can see crystal clear. No wonder there's so many people in America and the other countries that prescribe this, where there's so many people on these medicines long term, well after the point that they've really wanted to get off, after the long-term side effects have started to increase and the long-term effectiveness of the medicine has started to decrease. So there's this decreasing benefits, increasing long-term side effects, negative consequences. You get a diminishing return. At the beginning, the cost benefit analysis of getting on Suboxone or another buprenorphine formulation is usually really high benefit, not a lot of cost. When it comes to breaking free of a opioid addiction that can be, you can overdose and die. So many bad things can happen, especially when people are using street street drugs, street oxys, and street stuff cut with fentanyl. So dangerous. So, of course, the opportunity to get on Suboxone or another medicine like it, that's going to be almost a no brainer for a lot of people. And so I totally get that. It was for me, and it helped me out. Suboxone helped me out through a really tough time. All right, now it's time for number 12. And I'm starting to realize right now that this is going to be a much, much longer video than I had intended. And so I guess I'm going to find out who the people that really want this to achieve this goal are. Because for anyone to watch this entire video, I know for a fact that they want off this medicine so bad. So at some point, I know I'm going to be losing some people because this is just going on for so long. But here we go. I'm still going for you. Number 12 is the three fears. What I mean by that is not a physical threat fear. So, and we'll talk about the three fears in a minute. There's two types of fears. There's physical threat fear, which is based on survival. Then there's non-physical threat fear. If you think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors in the past, if one of them saw a saber-toothed tiger, for example, their sympathetic nervous system, which is a division of the autonomic nervous system, is going to activate the fight or flight or freeze or faint response. That means that all their energy is going to go away from digestion, away from their immune system. All the stress hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol are going to shoot through them so they can be alert and awake, and they can have lots of energy in their muscles, in their legs, in their arms to either be able to flee or to be able to fight the saber-toothed tiger. And so when this happens nowadays, for example, maybe you're driving down the freeway at 10 p.m. and then you see in the oncoming freeway lane, maybe 100 yards ahead, you see a driver starting to kind of swerve. And then as they get pretty close to you, they swerve right into your lane. And at that point, that is a physical threat fear. That is like your amygdala gets super fearful and you respond. There's also a few types of non-physical threat fear, which, even though it's not like a survival issue, they can keep people stuck on Suboxone, and they can keep people stuck at not achieving other goals because of these fears. So there's three main fears. Number one is fear of loss. When it comes to Suboxone, I view this as fear of the benefits that a person's going to lose. So when it came to me quitting Suboxone and quitting other opioids, I used to love the opioid benefits. They gave me energy, confidence, euphoria, made me feel okay about myself, made me care about other people more. They made me more empathetic. So I just felt really good and really adaptable and resilient to be able to handle life and enjoy it while I was under the influence of opioids. Not when I was smoking heroin, but when I was on Suboxone, yes. When I had a, moderate pill addiction and I also had a job so I could pay for those pills, yes. They gave me lots of benefits, uh, dissolved my anxiety, took away depression, increased energy and confidence. Those are some mega benefits for a person like I was. And so the fear of losing those benefits and losing those benefits for life, that was very scary. Then there's so for you in your situation, what you could do if you wanted to is write down fear of loss. One, fear of loss. What am I afraid of losing by quitting Suboxone? Might be nothing. It might be one thing. It might be several things to different intensities as well. Number two, that's fear of the process. And typically here, when it comes to quitting Suboxone, a lot of people will have fear of one part of the process, or they'll have fears regarding the whole process. But usually, more often, people have a fear of one or two parts of the process. For example, somebody quitting Suboxone, they're okay going all the way to maybe 2 milligrams in their case. But then the fear of the process part, because every time they try to go underneath 2 milligrams, they start to really feel it. Oh, all of a sudden they're not sleeping as good. They're anxious throughout the day. Just for whatever reason, their body does not react well when they go lower than that, what I call their personal threshold. The spot in their taper in which they personally going any lower than that threshold spot seems to feel almost impossible. They could get down okay to where they are now, but now as soon as they get to this personal threshold spot, this is where the going get tough, and hopefully the tough can get gone. But I know it's not just about mental toughness and discipline, because the way the brain freaks out for people getting below their personal threshold spot, ooh, it can just cause so many hosts of problems. Then there's some people, they may not be afraid of the process of tapering, but they might be afraid of after they transition off of the taper. And then they've got, maybe they're one of those people that we talked about that has underlying physical health issues. How about chronic pain? So they're not really too fearful about tapering. Maybe they've done it before, they know how to do it. But their problem is that every 2 to 3 weeks after they come completely off Suboxone, their chronic pain is greatly exacerbated, worsened, and their chronic fatigue is greatly exacerbated. So their pain goes way up. Their fatigues, just their exhaustion is even more so than a person coming off Suboxone that doesn't have underlying chronic fatigue and chronic pain. So then we come to number three. That's fear of the outcome. This would be regarding Suboxone. Someone has a fear of, okay, there's fears of the loss, fears of the process. What about fear of the outcome? What if I taper all the way down here? What if I taper all the way off and then I'm absolutely miserable? What if I spend 2 years doing a long, slow taper to come off of a 8-year Suboxone maintenance therapy run, and then I never feel normal again? Oh, I get this one a lot. That's a fear of the outcome. What if I come off Suboxone? What if I come off of opioids, all opioids, and I never feel normal again? What if I've done irreversible and permanent, lasting chronic brain physiology dysfunction? That is a huge fear, non physical threat fear, but it relates to the physical brain, your physical and mental health. So these are valid fears. And what I recommend that people do if they want to get over them, to first list their fears, all three: uh, fear of loss, fear of the process, and fear of the outcome. Try to jot down as many as you can think of. And then usually the opposite of those fears is what you want to focus on, the very antithesis. So when it comes to fear of losing benefits, you want to find out what those fears are and then focus on all the benefits that you can get as a result of being off of the medicine and being achieving this magnificent goal of doing something so outstanding that not everybody is able to do. Instead of focusing on fear of the process, oh, this step of the process is going to be too hard. Oh, this sounds way too scary. I don't know if I can do this. To instead of thinking about those fears, first list them out, then focus on, you know what? I'm going to go through this process, and it might be hard. It might be really hard, but it's okay. I'm not going to be attached. And I'm simply going to link personal fulfillment and personal growth to the process of going through this. So uh, no matter what the outcome is, maybe you don't get it on your first try. Looking at in this way, you're like, okay, this is a growth experience. This is, and even if I don't make it on my next attempt, I have the opportunity to get a lot of feedback. That's all failure is feedback. It's all um, things to learn from. That's it. That's all it is. And when you learn from these failures, from these failed attempts, as long as you're learning at least one thing that you did that you shouldn't have done, or that you didn't do and you should have done, how you can do something better. As long as you're learning as you go, that's progress in every sense of the word. Number 13 is not having adequate levels of self discipline. This is something that I was sorely lacking in back when I was on Suboxone, back when I was on opioids in general, for those years on opioids, and honestly, for the majority of my life leading up to the age of 32 when I quit all those things. I was very lacking in self discipline, being able to do what you want to do and need to do, even when it doesn't feel good. Self discipline is basically like doing what you know needs to be done, regardless of how you feel. So, for example, somebody that is on a Suboxone taper protocol, somebody that has a lot of discipline, they're going to do that thing and they're going to get through it. If they have high levels of discipline, even if they don't feel like tapering lower, even if they don't feel like transitioning all the way off and going through that transition phase of getting all the buprenorphine out of your receptors and out of your blood, even if they don't feel like doing it, even if they're very resistant doing it, when a person has very high levels of self-discipline, that's the ability to do what needs to be done, regardless of whether it sucks or not. I talked about who was it? David Goggins and Jocko Willink earlier, those ex-Navy SEALs. One of Jocko Willink's famous sayings, and he even wrote a book by this title, is discipline equals freedom. A lot of people think that if they're really disciplined, they don't have much freedom in life because they're having to do all this discipline, having to do it. And his argument is that no, it's the opposite is true. The more discipline a person has, the more freedom that gives them. Maybe not in that day that they've developed that discipline, but over time, practicing and using that discipline day in, day out, eventually, pretty soon, it leads to more and more freedom overall. Number 14 is not having strong enough or powerful enough reasons to quit Suboxone. So there are quite a few people that are on this medicine that they do really want to get off, but they don't have a compelling enough reason or multiple compelling enough reasons to actually step up and do all the things that are necessary to actually come all the way off this medicine and stay off of it. So a lot of people are just not at that point as a result of not having strong enough reasons to actually quit. So for example, what if somebody has like no reasons at all? Like everything's good. If somebody's on Suboxone and the medicine works really good, they get very little side effects whatsoever, and they just feel great on it. So again, really good medicine efficacy. They feel awesome on it and very little side effects. Well, where's going to be that person's compelling reason to get off of it? They're probably not going to have too many reasons and not too many powerful reasons to quit. Usually the powerful reasons come from things like somebody really wants to transform their health. Maybe the being on the medicine long term has led to a lot of long-term side effects that just won't go away, and they remember what it felt like back in the day to have natural joy, to feel, naturally what their brain was meant to feel like, and these natural highs from nature and love and exercise and fun activities. There's quite a few people that have lost that ability. They've stated to me, and I've seen it written online, that they feel their joy for life gone, emotionally flat, or even depressed, tired, just don't have the joy for life or anything close to it. So these people in this situation, they're going to have much stronger reasons to quit the medicine than somebody that feels great on it and there's very little side effects and it just makes life awesome. That's how it was for me at the beginning when I first got on Suboxone for opioid addiction. Back then, it was mostly prescription Oxycontin, oxycodone, and hydrocodone addiction. But really, I was doing any opioids that I could purchase illegally from drug dealers. And so eventually, maybe after a month on it, started to give me flaky skin and hot flashes on my face, just hot flashes, like I was a female going through menopause. And it gave me cystic acne all over my back. Luckily, that was the only place I had it. Luckily, it wasn't all over my face at that point, and neck and chest. Especially, it wasn't on my face, but still all over my back. As a result, I was embarrassed to take my t-shirt off and go swimming at the swimming pool. I was embarrassed to walk around outside on a hot summer day without a shirt on because it just looked nasty. And it felt nasty too. You could feel it. Some of them would hurt. I had zero libido or close to zero libido also after not too long on Suboxone. Also, the prescription opioids zapped my libido, but for whatever reason, being on Suboxone for myself, that zapped my libido even more. And also, I felt like kind of chemical. It gave me a real chemical feeling. Now, part of the reason was probably my fault. Now, these were the old 8 milligram orange Tang flavored Suboxone tablets. This is a long time ago that I used these. They didn't even have the film out back then. I wasn't getting them from a doctor or a psychiatrist. I was purchasing them from anywhere from $10 to $20 or $25 per tablet from drug dealers. And a lot of these drug dealers were friends of mine. And so, where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. I wasn't using them sublingually. I was crushing these Suboxone tablets up and snorting them. Not, sometimes I'd do a whole 8 milligrams at once, but more often, what I'd do is I'd snort maybe 2 to 4 milligrams first thing in the morning. I'd walk across the street to the restaurant that I worked at, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner place that was pretty much crowded. The majority of the time we were open, and quite often super crowded. We had a lot of great coffee on tap. One of the kinds was the African small coffee bean, Tanzania peaberry. Oh, that was my favorite coffee. And we could drink, as much as we wanted of it for free. The owner of that restaurant was a total coffee fanatic, lover, addict. He just was all about coffee. And so that is actually the time in my life when I started getting into coffee. Before then, never got into it. Working at this place, started to get into it. And I found that snorting Suboxone dust, just disgusting taste. Ugh. Oh, the thought of it just grosses me out now. So I was doing a lot of illegal stuff and abusing the medicine. I was using it without a prescription, and I was misusing it beyond the point of not having a prescription. I was also snorting it. That's where I was back then. And so that might be another reason why I was getting kind of these extra bad side effects. It's because I was snorting it. I can only imagine. I'm not positive, but that might have had something to do with why it made me feel so weird and chemically. It wasn't designed to snort up your nose, but people that are heavily addicted to substances, such as I was back in the day, when we're at that point in our life, we just kind of do that stuff. Number 15 is a person's health and vitality are simply not strong enough, not powerful enough to come all the way off of Suboxone. I'm thinking right now of what about if a person's like 65 years old and they've been on Suboxone for 12 years and they're really not in good shape regarding their physical and mental health. Their overall levels of health and constitution and vitality is just really, really low. So if it's really, really low already, imagine the process of tapering below their personal threshold. Imagine the process of them continuing to go lower and lower beneath their threshold and transitioning all the way off of the substance if their health and vitality and their overall constitution is already suffering quite a lot. Imagine that and compare that to somebody that's 19 years old. Say it's a 19-year-old athlete and he's been on it for, screw this. Let's call it a 29-year-old that's been on Suboxone since they were old enough to be on it. It's probably 18 years old. So let's say in that situation, they're late 20s, been on it close to a decade. They're an athlete. They eat really well. They take great supplements. They see their doctor for physicals and checkups. They're really in tune with their health. They value their health very highly. Let's say it's their top value in life is health. And they've maintained these health disciplines, these health habits throughout the entire time that they've been on Suboxone treatment. Well, that person's going to have most likely a much easier time, or maybe not much easier, but a much less difficult time than the person we were just talking about that was 65 years old and their health, vitality, constitution is really, really suffering. They're not exercising. They're not eating great. They're tired a lot of the time. They seem to have very little life force, at least in comparison to a lot of other people their age, and certainly compared to what they were like 20 years prior. So this is a huge one. This is a big, big, big time one. A person's starting level of physical health and vitality, their strong constitution, hopefully, that starting point is going to be so much more preferable than someone that's just not really in great shape with their health. And, a lot of people are in very poor health. As a matter of fact, it's an epidemic in America where people are not getting enough nutritious foods. They're not getting enough physical exercise or even just movement in general. They don't have healthy, restorative sleep patterns and habits. So these things can all add up. Number 16 is literally one of my favorite topics. And number 16 states that Suboxone has not become an exhausted resource for you. One of the first books I read, this was alternative reading, in addition to all the things I was learning when I went to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. We were learning a lot of traditional things like theories of counseling and drug pharmacology and physiology, group counseling, you know, uh, counseling ethics, lots of really cool, helpful things that I needed to know. But that wasn't enough for me. I was so hungry to learn how to help people and to learn how to help myself get better as a person, increase my own health in body and mind and spirit. So, one of the books that I ordered off Amazon way back then was called Neurolinguistic Programming in the Treatment of Alcoholism. Neurolinguistic programming, also more commonly called NLP, is a very cool way to look at life. It's kind of like an owner's manual for the brain. One of the best concepts I learned in this book was the idea that addiction is nothing more than an exhausted resource. And I have made articles on this in the past, videos on my old channel that are no longer around because they're just so old and outdated. But here's what I mean by this. Uh, when someone first starts using Suboxone, for this example, it's a resource for them. They use Suboxone, and if they stay on it, it's because they're getting benefits from it. Some people use it for the first time, and it ends up being not a good choice for them. For whatever reason, maybe it's not a good fit with their biochemical profile. We all have our own highly unique biochemical profiles, something called biochemical individuality. So some people will take Suboxone and it doesn't work good for them at all. It gives them really bad side effects. Doesn't work great right from the get-go. But more often than that, people will do good on it. At least they'll get lots of benefits. There might be some negative consequences too, like side effects, like the lack of libido and other side effects that we've talked about. But here's what happens. As someone's going along the path of using opioids, then using Suboxone, the more benefits it gives you, physical benefits, psychological benefits, practical benefits like energy to get stuff done for a lot of people. When there's lots of high benefits and there's not a lot of negative consequences, so lots of positive benefits with lower negative consequences, well, that's a resource for someone. It's a resource of something that helps make a person's life easier, at least in the respect we're talking about it here. Here's how it becomes an exhausted resource. When I first started using opioid pills, I was 22 years old. That was the first time I ever took an opiate. It was a five milligram hydrocodone with 500 milligrams of acetaminophen. Is that right? Yeah, 5 milligrams hydrocodone. So they were literally like the Norco fives or the Vicodin fives, generic. So just a 5 milligram hydrocodone. That one pill gave me energy and confidence and a new sense of like awesomeness. The sky was a new shade of blue. And for 8 years, I was able to use opiate pills from time to time, irregularly, certainly not daily, maybe on average a few times a month, although there'd certainly be months and months in a row when I wouldn't use them. Every time they came around and somebody had them, I was like, yeah, I'll buy some of those off you. So for 8 years, I never got addicted. The only negative consequences I had, at least from using prescription opiates during those years, was, some itchy. They may be really itchy. And that would be if I took too much, just driving me crazy how itchy my nose would be. The next day or 2 days, I'd often be constipated from the pills. They'd make me a little dehydrated, but other than, these kind of minor negative consequences, for how awesome they made me feel when I was on them, those resource benefits so outweighed the small negative consequences, at least for me. So that they were just a resource that made my life better at that point. Not the healthiest resource, not the most adaptive resource for adding, benefits to your life, certainly not, but a resource nonetheless. And it was only when I started to use them daily around the age of 29 or 30, using them daily. Before long, they weren't doing as much to me anymore. Now I had to use a very high amount, and it wasn't even doing as much as that 5 milligram hydrocodone back in the day did for me. After daily use for as little as maybe a few weeks, now I was needing like 100 milligrams of oxycodone or oxycontin per day. And even that amount was not giving me the same efficacy as when I first started taking the pills. And during that 8 years, I could feel great on like one or two or three little 5 or 10 milligram pills, and that was it for the whole day. So, what happens with a lot of people is this: they'll start using opioids and they'll get benefits, whether they're using opioids for pain relief as prescribed by a doctor, whether they're using opioids like I was, unprescribed, recreational use, self medicating use, all illicit use like that. However, a person starts to use them, if they continue to use them, it's because they're getting benefits. It's a resource for them. But here's how I view this process. As soon as the negative consequences rise and rise and rise, and the positive benefits fall and fall and fall, eventually you get like a yo-yo effect, or you get the opposite thing where before there was lots of benefits with lots little negative consequences. Over time, especially when people are using these medicines or drugs daily for prolonged use, for a lot of people, it might take months, might take years, it might take decades, depending on the person. Eventually, oftentimes, not always, oftentimes, negative consequences get higher and higher, positive benefits get lower and lower. And when the use of these opioids, and in this case, Suboxone, when it's actually the net result is it's causing more negative consequences than the positive benefits that it's bringing in, well, the NLP principle would state that now this opioid use is an exhausted resource. So a lot of people are stuck on Suboxone long term and they're not able to get off. And one of the reasons is because it's not an exhausted resource for them. They're still getting a good amount of benefits, and maybe the benefits have gone down, but the negative consequences have not got high enough to really, really override all those positive benefits. So it's somewhere, and in that spot, when it's not so black and white, it's easy to stay on that medicine. It's easy to stay on it long term. So that's when people get to the point where it's a super exhausted resource, it just makes them feel like crap. They're getting so many side effects. Their health is just not good. They have no joy for life. They just hate taking the medicine. They just can't stand it. That is when that's when Suboxone is an exhausted resource. And from that point, it's easier to be like, okay, I really want off this stuff. 24/7, you're thinking about it. Number 17 is a person having limiting, disempowering beliefs about their personal ability to come all the way off Suboxone and then to eventually feel really good again and to stay off of it. A lot of times people will have very limiting beliefs like, I'm too old. I've been on Suboxone for too long and I'm too old and there's just no way I'll be able to get off it. A lot of people have just given up all hope at any ability to get off this medicine once they get to a certain point in age and they've been on the medicine for a certain amount of time. Other people believe that they're just way too busy and they can never take time off from responsibilities, and they just don't see any time in the foreseeable future where they'll have enough time to take off from responsibilities to where they can really do this and focus close to 100% of their time and energy and focus on achieving this goal. And I totally get it. I totally get it. Suboxone was pretty difficult for me to get off after only being on it for a few months and never going up more than 8 milligrams. And I tapered down to about, maybe 1 milligram per day. And I was able to quit. The first 2 weeks were hard and I had to work. I remember being at the restaurant. My legs were super tired, super sore. I was anxious. The restaurant was really busy. And I had a daughter too, a newborn baby at that point that I shared partial custody, half and half custody and placement with. So when I wasn't working, a lot of the time I was taking care of a newborn baby. And so that was a struggle, but I was able to do it. I think at that point I might have been around 31 or maybe 30 and a half, somewhere in my early 30s. And it was doable. But even at that point, it was difficult. So I can easily see how a lot of people can get these limiting beliefs and these disempowering beliefs because they might have tried many times and it's just been way too difficult. What that does is that reinforces and makes more powerful those limiting beliefs. It makes sense how this process works. And what we believe about this, what we believe in ourselves, usually dictates the action that we take or the actions that we do not take. If a person doesn't believe that they'll be able to do it, they think it's just they've been on it for too long and they're too old and they got too many issues, they're probably not even going to try, or they're not even going to, give it a wholehearted try if their beliefs are like that. If somebody believes that, oh, yeah, I can totally do this, it's not going to be easy, but I believe in myself. I believe that with all the resources that I have and the people around me that can support me, that I can do this. Somebody with those beliefs is probably going to take more action and better actions and more consistent actions toward accomplishing this goal. So yeah, this is one that keeps a lot of people stuck on Suboxone for a long time after they want to quit. It's these disempowering, limiting beliefs about their personal ability to actually do this. Reason number 18 is when a person's levels of awareness and consciousness are not high enough to help them to successfully get off Suboxone. Or maybe some days they have high levels of awareness and high levels of consciousness, but on a consistent basis, it's not at that high spot. So, awareness is simply being aware of what's going on, what the behaviors are that are happening in your life that you're doing that are leading to negative consequences. And a lot of people live primarily in this unconscious autopilot mode of living life. That's how I was for probably the vast majority of my life. It was not highly aware. I wasn't really like hyper aware of the decisions that I was making and the impact they were having on me. I would have moments or even days of clarity regarding that. But oftentimes I was just living in reaction and I was living in a series that played out of these unconscious automatic habits, a lot of them bad habits too. And I simply didn't have enough awareness and consciousness back then to help me to see the goal through to the end. And then this kind of goes with number 19 as well. They're different, but they can kind of go together. Number 19 is a person's prefrontal cortex is too eroded, too disabled, too offline, that it's really interfering with their ability. It's stopping them from being able to taper off or transition all the way off Suboxone. This is very common. And when somebody is in active addiction, I'll use myself as an example. When I was addicted to pills and then eventually smoking heroin, oh man, that eroded my prefrontal cortex so much. This is proven in brain scans now. The One of the head people of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Nora Volkow, she is brilliant when it comes to the addicted brain. This is a concept that I actually learned the details, the in-depth details of from her. I also learned it from Dr. Kevin McCauley, the doctor that created the documentary back maybe 12 years ago now, 10 years ago now, called Pleasure Unwoven, that really does an excellent job of showing just how addiction rewires the brain. Addiction can hijack your midbrain to where on Maslow's survival hierarchy of needs, at the bottom, you need food, water, shelter, defense from predators, and then procreation. Those are all like the survival, living and procreating needs. They're all survival. To go above that, then you need friends and family and interests and eventually self actualization. But how Dr. Kevin McCauley explained it in that DVD that it was back then, and now it's online digitally. And if you search for Dr. Kevin McCauley on YouTube, he's got some really awesome keynote speeches of him talking about this addicted brain. And his keynotes, while the documentary is pretty dry, the keynote presentations, at least the ones that I've seen, are really funny. He's got some funny jokes in there, and the guy's hilarious and he's brilliant. But he shows in that documentary and on the keynotes that I've watched how when a person's becomes totally addicted to opioids or alcohol or one of the many other highly addictive substances, how it can actually rewire our brain to where instead of food, water, and shelter, defending from predators, all those main needs, how now the substance becomes the ultimate survival need. And so this played out for me for sure. Didn't matter about if I had money for rent or food or any of that kind of stuff. If it was came between paying rent on time, paying bills on time, going to the grocery store and buying food, if it was a choice between that or spending the last money I had on pills or heroin and then, paying those bills eventually but late, most of the time I would choose the pills. 100% of the time I would choose opioids if it was I was gonna go into opioid withdrawal if I didn't take them. So that's like total survival itself. So when you couple this hijacked midbrain with, and this is also verified by all these experts in the studies that they've done in brain scans, when your midbrain links survival itself to the drug, or alcohol for some people, and your prefrontal cortex over repeated exposure to these drugs administration, alcohol administration, repeated exposure over prolonged amount of time, what this can do is disables, erodes the functioning of our prefrontal cortex. This is like a very important part of our brain that helps us to make critical decisions, the difference between right and wrong, self-control, willpower, discipline. That stuff comes a lot of the time primarily from the prefrontal cortex. Imagine if you've got a really low functioning prefrontal cortex. And a lot of people don't even need to have ever taken drugs or alcohol to have dysfunctioning prefrontal cortex activity. Simply the process of aging and growing older in age, and the process of, people that are not getting a good diet and lots of stress. There's so many different things that can erode and lessen the overall efficacy of the prefrontal cortex. Luckily, since Suboxone and these other buprenorphine formulations are slow onset, slow offset, and when used correctly in the way that is recommended by your doctor, this can actually help to heal damaged prefrontal cortex, hijacked midbrain, because although it's still an opioid, it can get you away from opioid addiction, if that makes sense. You're using this opioid that was developed to help people to still be on opioids so their nervous system just doesn't go into total havoc, and they can stabilize on Suboxone, break free from perhaps short acting heroin addiction or short acting oxycodone addiction, for example. That, people that are snorting oxycodone all day, that hits you really, really quick, and it also wears off pretty quick. So the faster a drug's effects come on, and subsequently the faster those effects wear off, Typically, the more addictive that drug is going to be, and the more it can wire our brain to like link survival itself to this substance. So, luckily, with Suboxone and other buprenorphine formulations, at least that gives a person a really good chance to get away from all that. But when it comes to tapering off, transitioning all the way off, they can still have disabled, not 100% disabled, but instead of like 100% optimized prefrontal cortex, what if the person is 69 years old and they're just, they're the symptoms of aging are there, they're kind of losing their mental capacities. They've been on Suboxone for maybe 5 years at this point, and the side effects are starting to make them have more cognitive decline. For this example, you know, the they're lacking the prefrontal cortex brain power to be able to successfully come all the way off this medicine. Are you starting to see all these different reasons? It's like even blowing my mind right now. And I know this stuff. I've been doing this stuff for close to 10 years. When you add in how many years I was addicted to opioids and all the years before that I was addicted to alcohol at one point for many, many years. That was my longest addiction. Addicted to benzos, addicted to cannabis, just all these things starting at a very young age as a teenager, drinking alcohol, using cannabis. In my early 20s, getting into, recreational pills when I finally had the courage to try those and I wasn't scared to death of them anymore. All this repeated drug exposure over time without taking care of your health on top of that just leads to more and more brain dysfunction for a lot of us, unfortunately. But it's okay because, in my opinion, no matter how far down a person has gone, oftentimes through diligent, strategic work and planning and action, they can actually repair or reverse or at least mitigate a lot of that brain dysfunction. Our bodies really are a healing miracle machine if we give it what it needs to be the healing miracle that it truly is, while simultaneously abstaining from the use of lots of these things that act as kind of poisons to our brain. A lot of these different types of drugs, hard for our liver to process, negative changes to the brain. So once people start to get more aware about and conscious of and more value assigning to brain health, spiritual health, psychological health, social health, environmental health. In an upcoming video, you're going to learn about what I call, and my co host Chris Scott of Elevation Recovery call, the hierarchy of recovery, which is a model that can be used by a person to holistically detox and recover from any substance, including Suboxone. It is a bio, psycho, social, environmental, spiritual model that could even be used for anxiety recovery. One of my favorite psychiatrists on the planet, Dr. What's his name? Daniel Amen. Yeah, Daniel Amen. I could be butchering his first name. Dr. Amen, I'm pretty sure it's Daniel. He is the founder of the Amen clinics, I think. Maybe his name's pronounced Daniel Amen. But he's got these clinics, and when people go to his clinics, they can get these SPECT brain scans, SPECT. It scans for blood flow, and he's scanned well over 100,000 brains since I think the early 1990s to present day, and he helps patients develop biopsychosocial, environmental, spiritual brain healing plans to get their brain health back from whatever thing they're suffering from currently. A lot of the time, he'll prescribe supplements, and he's got his own supplement line that's got exquisite, high quality products for the most part. And oftentimes, he'll also prescribe one or two medicines for a person if he doesn't think supplements alone are going to be helpful enough. But I mean, he talks about nutrition, your relationships, the environment that you're living in your community, your spiritual fitness and spirituality. These things all, like when somebody focuses on biopsychosocial, environmental, spiritual, or physical, mental, emotional, environmental, metaphysical, or non physical, different ways to spin it. But when you address all of those areas, that is holistic recovery because you're leaving no stone unturned. You're literally addressing all of the different aspects of us and our environment, our physical self, our spiritual self, in the environment that we live in, and the people that are around us and that are in our lives. Reason number 20 is that a person has sensory processing sensitivity, SPS. This is an innate trait that 20% of humans have. It's innate from birth. They've also found more than 100 species of animals that also have this innate trait. And they believe that there could be 100% of animals that actually have it. What is SPS? It's more commonly heard as highly sensitive person, or HSP, the HSP trait. You might have heard of that before. You yourself might even have this high sensitivity trait. I do. And a lot of the people that I've corresponded with when it comes to being on opioids or being on benzos or being on alcohol or being on muscle relaxers or being on gabapentinoids or being on one or more substances that calm down the central nervous system. It's very common for people that have especially high levels of this high sensitivity, highly sensitive trait, sensory processing sensitivity. It's very common for people to get overstimulated, to get anxious, to get like, the world can just be too loud and too bright and too harsh and too angry. For a lot of HSPs, the highly sensitive persons, there's again 20% of humanity has this. It's too much. 20% is too much for it to be a disorder, but it's also too little to be well understood by the masses. And so, my experience with this, and I think the technical definition is something like people with this trait have a faster and deeper cognitive processing speed of sensory stimuli. And so, it's very easy for these people, if they're a highly sensitive person, when it comes to transitioning off Suboxone, going through the taper, or going through the withdrawal, the post acute withdrawal, somebody that has this trait, they're going to be more prone to anxiousness, more prone to fear and worrisome thoughts, more prone to stress, more proneness to overwhelm. There are so many people that are currently on Suboxone or currently on a different buprenorphine formulation or currently on a different type of opioid altogether that have SPS, do not know that they have it, have always realized or have for a long time realized that they're more sensitive than a lot of other people, but they just don't know that it's because of this innate biological trait that actually can be seen, in my opinion, as a double-edged sword. It can be really helpful for things like creative work and writing and video production and playing music and writing and composing music and even cooking. It can be so good for so many things, being able to sense other people's emotions more. There's a lot of benefits of it. There's also a lot of drawbacks. There's also a lot of things that can end up making a person's life just miserable if they're not taking care of themselves for having this trait. And there's different levels of intensity of it too. Some people have just a little small case of this trait, a little bit of extra sensory processing sensitivity, enough to have the trait, but not enough for it to be really hardcore. Then there's some people that are highly sensitive people, and the intensity of this trait is way stronger. It's way more prominent in their life. That's one of the main reasons I was always drawn to CNS depressants. At the beginning, alcohol, and then Valium and other benzos, and then opioids not too long after that. And I realized, wow, if I take uppers, back then, those things would make me paranoid or anxious or fearful. I didn't like the feeling of being on these uppers. I have sensory processing sensitivity. I'm a highly sensitive person. I didn't know it back then by the name, but I knew my brain and I knew how it operated. And I didn't need anything else to be jacking up that trait and making it more hyperactive. No, 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 no. I was looking for substances and activities and behaviors, whether they were adaptive or maladaptive or what. Sometimes it'd be so bad that I was just like, I don't even care. If I have to take Valium every day for the rest of my life, I don't care. If I have to take opioids forever, I didn't care back then, because even though I would love to have been substance free, my experience with being drug and alcohol free back then was just a lot of sensitivity. I didn't have a protective barrier or skills to protect me from the harshness and all the crazy stuff going on around me and other people. It was just very intense for me. So, opioids, especially, were my huge escape from all that sensitivity. Opioids, any opioid's going to boost your endorphins. They boost endorphins, they bind to the opioid receptors, and you release a bunch of endorphin. That's painkillers, right? Painkillers. Those painkillers that I was taking were making me less sensitive. And a lot of the times, not only less sensitive, but they were making me really just like I had a buffer. There was now this opioid invisible buffer that protected me from the harshness of the world, that calmed down and relaxed and made more confident my brain and my outlook on things. So this is a huge one right here. The sensory processing sensitivity trait. If this is resonating with you in regards to, yeah, you think you have this, you can just Google HSP test or HSP quiz, and it should come right up. There's a free test that was developed by Dr. Elaine Aron, who literally wrote the book on the highly sensitive person. I'm not sure when that book was published. I believe it might have been in like the late 1990s. An amazing book. She's got an amazing website with plenty of great free information on this. And when it comes to my own life, one of the most important, valuable, beneficial things that has ever happened to me was learning about highly sensitive person trait, sensory processing sensitivity, whatever a person wants to call it. Was first of all learning about it. Second of all, making the link that, oh my gosh, I have to have this. This is all like crazy. Then taking the test, the free test I was just talking about, scoring, I think 100%. It was just like, yeah, I'm a highly sensitive person. And then learning what Dr. Elaine Aron recommends for people that are highly sensitive persons. And ever since then, I've just always known that. And as a result, I've been able to build myself a new lifestyle and a new career, working from home, doing stuff that I absolutely love and helping people in a much more calm lifestyle than I had back in my drug using days, my drinking days, my partying days in general, my mental health issue days. My lifestyle back then was very stressful. I didn't do a lot of stuff to calm down my brain, to focus on, my sensitive creativity. I would just drown it with alcohol or numb it with pills and shut it off with benzos. And a lot of other people do that. It's no judgment here whatsoever. A lot of the times when I talk with people on the phone or written correspondence, they often say, gosh, I feel so grateful to be able to talk to somebody that no matter what I say, you don't judge. There's just tons of unconditional love, compassion, acceptance, because all the stuff that I did in my past, there has rarely been a person that I've talked to that did more fucked up shit than I did over that span of almost 20 years of doing all the substance going down that path. And so I get it. I know what it's like. I see I see this the desirability to use these substances, whether it's for pain relief or whether it's for escapism or whether it's for recreational use or whether it's for emotional numbing, trauma. I get it. I've used dozens of different drugs, maybe 2 dozen drugs, somewhere around there, most likely. And I've used substances for a lot of different reasons. And so I get it. I get it. Reason number 21 is when somebody ranks high in the trait called neuroticism on the Big Five personality test. I learned about this test a few years ago from Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, and there was an online test for me to take on these Big Five personality traits, and I ranked very high on neuroticism. Neuroticism's negative emotionality and worrying and being neurotic. And when people rank as high as I did on neuroticism as a personality trait, oh man, that makes quitting substances typically that can make it way more difficult for a person, especially when you're going through the actual total detoxification when you've come completely off and now the substance that you've been relying on and using is totally gone and your body's adjusting to that. Your central nervous system is adjusting to that. Your neurotransmitters are not imbalanced. There's imbalances regarding deficits of certain neurotransmitters, excesses of other neurotransmitters. So a lot of people, one of the reasons that they're still on Suboxone, even though they would love to get off, is due to this neuroticism trait. It's at least one of the reasons to where the negative emotionality and the worrying and the neuroticism just drives obsessive worrying thinking about the future, and it sucks. It's no fun. I haven't taken that personality test in maybe 3 years since I first learned about it. I'd imagine now that I've totally got my anxiety under control. Back then I still had anxiety back then, and it was nowhere near what it was in the past, but I still had it. It was not gone. Now that it's gone, I'm wondering if I retook that test, if I would score lower on neuroticism. So that can kind of go with the highly sensitive person trait. Think about it. If you have a faster and a deeper cognitive processing of sensory stimuli, and you're in a very stressful environment and life situation, that alone can make a person more neurotic. And then when you couple the highly sensitive person trait with high levels of neuroticism trait, then that can be a double whammy for some people that can make it more difficult to actually come off Suboxone successfully. So none of these things are total determinants as to, oh, if you have this trait, you can't get off this drug or this medicine. Absolutely not. The point of all of these is really just to kind of exhaust as many things as I could think of, or really it felt like I was being downloaded with this information after I had a spiritual intention to really serve and to really deliver value on this video. And so while you may have some of the things that we're talking about on here, or a lot of these things on this list, you're resonating with, like, yeah, I have that. Oh my gosh, that's one of the reasons I'm still on Suboxone. Don't worry, because just because these are issues right now, that doesn't mean they're permanent. That doesn't mean that you can't do something about these. And through personal development, that is developing your skills, developing your mindset, developing your spirituality, developing your relationships, and constant focus, consistency, consistent focus on developing yourself in body, in mind, in emotions, in spirit, relationships. Man, I was in such a shitty spot back in the day for a large portion of my life. Oh, I was down and out. I was malnourished and I was underweight and I was just toxified with all the nasty substances I was loading my body, alcohol and crystal meth and uh, benzos and opioids and cannabis and way gnarlier stuff too. Cocaine cut with all this nasty stuff and black tar heroin cut with who knows what. I was not in a good spot for a long time due to the decisions that I made. And I have completely transformed my body, mind, spirit, emotions, environment, relationships, and lifestyle in general, my belief systems. I am totally different than when I was in my addiction. I'm a completely different person. And if somebody that was as bad off as I was can make that type of a turnaround, and it took work, it took time, it took focus, it took financial investment in myself, it took growing pains, it took getting out of my comfort zone. All the greatest stuff in life is not in our comfort zone, it's outside the comfort zone, which is known as the growth zone. And when it comes to getting off Suboxone and healing your brain and feeling great and rebalancing, that is some serious growth zone stuff. And if you're not used to getting into the growth zone, if you're more used to being in the comfort zone a lot, it's not an overnight process of just going full in. It's about putting a foot out of the comfort zone and into the growth zone, putting one foot out, one foot in, testing the waters, growing. And then over time, over the weeks, over the months, over the years, eventually over the decades, expanding your comfort zone. So grow, 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 grow. And then you get comfortable with that further outer limits. And now that becomes your comfort zone. Then you can grow, 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 grow. And you see how this process works is nowadays, back in the day, my comfort zone was really, really, really using drugs and video games and surfing and sexual intercourse and fast food and sugar and junk food. And I was living most of my life in my comfort zone. You had to push me into my growth zone. You had to get leverage on me. There had to be negative consequences, it, sufficient ones, if I was going to get into the growth zone. I loved my little comfort bubble. But now my comfort zone is so much bigger that a lot of things that would have made me very fearful, very uncomfortable back then, now they're very comfortable for me. So I'm always trying to expand my comfort zone and make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and then continuing to go out in the growth zone. One foot in the growth zone, one foot in the comfort zone. Sometimes you go both feet out and you just really got to do it. Reason number 22 is when a person's basal ganglia in their brain has become powerfully wired and conditioned for the habit of taking Suboxone daily. So, again, on video one, we talked about how Suboxone affects the brain, how it binds to opioid receptors, and then how, from a state of neuronal adaptation, aka physiological or physical buprenorphine dependence, now your neurons only function normally once you have a specific amount of the buprenorphine in your opioids in your blood. So, another aspect of this is that there's an area of our brain called the basal ganglia, and that is where the habit loop is wired. It's an unconscious part of the brain, and this can really condition us. When a habit is wired powerfully in the basal ganglia, that's where all the habits are wired. Then not only are you fighting with, the withdrawal symptoms of tapering below your threshold spot, the withdrawal symptoms from a cold turkey detox for the people that do that, the physiological responses going on in post acute withdrawal. But then on top of all those things, that part of our brain, the basal ganglia, really, really is conditioned. There's a strong neural pathway and wiring just for the habit of simply taking Suboxone on a regular basis. A lot of people have told me that it's such a habit. Like if on one day they're not feeling too energized and they're just feeling kind of funky, automatically they won't even really think about it. They'll just notice, or they won't notice. They'll go for more Suboxone. They'll take a little bit extra. And then there's some people that are only supposed to take it in the mornings, and that's what their doctor has been suggesting, and that's what they've been doing. But them on some days, they'll get into this habit of taking it twice a day. Maybe a few days in a row, they're just not feeling good. They got a lot of stressful things coming up. And so they take Suboxone twice a day. So they're taking it more often, and they're either taking the same amount as when they're taking it once a day, or they're even taking a little bit extra. Then, after just a few days in a row, several days in a row, especially of doing this, that can become already starting to get wired in this basal ganglia. And then, say all the stressful stuff is over after 1 week. And now, when it comes time to just going back to using Suboxone one time a day, well, now they're just already kind of in the habit of using it twice a day. And so this can be really dangerous, and it can go on beneath our conscious awareness. And so that's why earlier, one of the reasons was when a person's awareness and consciousness are not at high enough levels. A lot of times people are just, they're just doing stuff throughout the day, and we're just not highly cognizant of what we're doing and the results of what we're doing. Number 23 is a really, really big one. That is when a person has a lot of stress in their life. Stress, 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 stress. Imagine trying to get off of Suboxone when you've got a lot of stress in your life. It can be difficult enough for many people to transition all the way off Suboxone if they don't have much stress in their life. Even then, for a lot of people, it can be quite difficult. But then what happens a lot is the more stress a person has in their life on a day-to-day basis, the harder that can make it for that person to taper off Suboxone or to even make the appointment and have the courage to go do a medical detox somewhere. That constant stress, so many Americans have chronic stress. And, it's not just America either. There's many countries where stress is a big issue. Certainly here in the US, it's gigantic. Stress, 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 stress for a lot of people. And not a lot of eustress, a lot of distress. I have a feeling that many people that are stuck on Suboxone or other buprenorphine formulations right now, if somebody gave them, let's say for this example, someone gave them $500,000 and said, okay, here's $500,000, but I want you to quit your job or your career, or whatever's going on, and just take the next 3 months off. Shoot, take the next 6 months off and don't have any responsibilities. If you don't have work, pay people to clean your house, pay people to cook you food, and then you've got all this money, this huge security comfort money right there. What does that do? If that were to happen, that would reduce all of, or a lot, most of probably, the stress in that person's life. Wow, I've got all this money. Now I don't need to go to work for a long time, and I can really afford the stuff that I need to do this Suboxone treatment. I can purchase the best supplements. I can get the best doctor or detox protocol or medical detox, or I can do whatever I need. Unfortunately, most of us don't have that luxury. That was a big barrier to my being able to quit back in the day. Was I had so much stress 24/7. Most of it was things that I got myself into those situations and that lifestyle. And of course, you can't control other people. You can't control the world. All we really have control over is our own behaviors and our own thoughts and our own words, what we think, say, and do. And it's very debatable as to how much control we even have over those things, because our brain health and the habits that are wired in there, our levels of consciousness and awareness, our levels of stress, all these things can make it seem like we just don't have as much agency over our thoughts, behaviors, and actions that a person with a really healthy brain and not a whole lot of stress in life could muster up. And that person is typically going to have an easier time having more free will over their own choices and behaviors and words that they say. Number 24 is also a quite important one. That is when a person is not exercising regularly. For when it comes to the habit of exercise, at least from the people that I've corresponded with, worked with, as far as success rates go, a lot of the people that are in the regular habit of exercising appear to be more equipped to transition all the way off Suboxone, to get to a lower and lower threshold spot and to come all the way off and to get through all of that process and the brain healing process. When people are exercising regularly, here's what it does: endorphin and enkephalin, endogenous natural painkillers, self stimulation, dopamine self stimulation. I'm going to quit saying self stimulation, but exercise produces naturally the endorphins and enkephalins, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and brain derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which a lot of people call miracle grow for the brain, because BDNF literally creates neurogenesis. And neurogenesis is the process of creating new and healthy brain cells. So, exercise has not only great effects for our muscles, but very awesome brain building and brain health benefits. One of the key reasons I was able to stay off opioid addiction and alcohol addiction and all those past substances is, I think, about 6 weeks after I got off, and I had been going for walks pretty much daily or close to daily during that first 6 weeks off after I transitioned off heroin. And then from that point, I got a gym membership. I got back into surfing and body surfing and swimming and jogging on the beach. And all that awesome exercise I was getting on a very consistent, regular basis was not only making my physique better and better back then, but my mood was getting way better. My brain health, my I was having better emotions. I was getting natural highs from exercising, and those natural highs would stay with me oftentimes for the whole rest of the day after I exercise. I would crave healthier foods. I would crave and drink more water. I would get better, more restorative deep sleep and fall asleep easier too. When I worked at the opioid outpatient treatment program back in the day, when it came to the people that were able to get off methadone, taper off methadone, and especially when it came to the people that were able to taper down low and transition off Suboxone and Subutex, almost every time it ever happened in a pretty smooth process, the patient was exercising regularly. Some of the patients I had were running or jogging on a regular basis. Some of them were doing yoga. Some of them were swimming. Some of them were just going for long walks on a regular basis. But the people that were not exercising, not even going for regular walks at the bare minimum, those were often the ones that had a much more difficult time or weren't even able to get off the medicine altogether. When you're tapering off of Suboxone, when you're transitioning off of Suboxone or any other opioid for that matter, a lot of the time people are going to have deficiencies in dopamine, in endorphins, and in other mood boosting neurochemicals due to our brains coming to rely upon these substances to produce these neurochemicals. So, some of the best ways to stimulate the natural production of these neurotransmitters, these mood and behavior neurochemicals, are to exercise regularly, to eat a healthy diet for your personal biochemistry, to take specific supplements to offset those neurotransmitter imbalances, to offset any micronutrient deficiencies. In upcoming videos, we're going to talk more about exercise and even more into supplements because, everyone knows that exercise is healthy and we will cover that. But really, we're going to get deep into high quality nutrients and supplements, things that you can get through diet and through supplements that you take that can help to offset the tapering symptoms from quitting Suboxone by giving your brain the ingredients it needs to create these neurochemicals that are going down and down and down the further you taper off Suboxone. And so, as your brain health is going down, and I call the key three exercise, supplements, and diet. When people even just focus on these key three can help people to have much higher success rates at transitioning off Suboxone. People that are not focusing on all three of these, maybe a lot of people aren't even focusing on any of these three. They're just trying to taper off Suboxone. They're not eating well. They're not exercising regularly or not exercising at all. They're not drinking enough water. They don't have good sleep habits. And it's just all this stuff adds up, and makes it more difficult for a lot of people. And finally, number 25, last but not least, and I'm very excited that this is getting over because I'm starting to lose my voice. I'm starting to really lose energy. I've been doing this for hours and hours and hours, and it has been really, really fun. But now I'm starting to notice myself. Energy's wearing off. So great that we're at the end. 25. You think you have to do it all alone, and haven't surrendered the process and the outcome over to the universe or source or spirit or God or God, God, Grand Master of Universe Design, and really haven't enlisted the power of spiritual intention and surrender to the flow of life or surrender to God. And this can help certain people, not everyone, because that's just not what they value. That's not what they believe. That's totally okay. But it's been proven time and time and time again that when people have a really, really high quality spiritual program, whether it's their own spiritual program that they work in their life, or whether they're active with their religion and their church, or whether they just simply go to 12-step meetings where there's the higher power concept and there's 12 steps that are designed to take people from their will, their way, trying to control everything and being attached and having desires to just surrendering that shit. Just, this is really difficult. I'm going to surrender it to a higher power of my misunderstanding. I'm going to surrender it to God. And taking people through the steps, what this does is helps people to live in a way from surrendering as things come up. They feel a resentment, you just surrender that. They feel guilt and shame about something, just surrender it. They feel stress coming up, surrender it. And then they start to get into the process of daily meditation and conscious contact with the higher power and really living these spiritual principles and living a life that is based on so much more than just this physical vessel, and really harnessing the power of intentions, spiritual intentions, surrender, forgiveness, acceptance, willingness, unconditional love, and tolerance. And I watched a documentary maybe about 6 months ago that was all based on this faith based program. I think it was in the Midwest somewhere. I could be wrong, but it was a long-term residential treatment program on many acres of this beautiful, gorgeous nature, just nature everywhere, everywhere. And this treatment program was phenomenal. And it was all faith-based, it was all Christian-based. And the total turnarounds that people that were heavily addicted to opioids made once they went to this program was just remarkable. They just had so much, you could tell when they were being interviewed, they were so much more forgiving of themselves and of others and of the world at large. They were so much more self compassionate and loving towards others. They were so much more service to others oriented versus service to self. They were out, instead of just focusing on themselves and poor me, they were out there serving their family and their community and others, and just really focusing on living the principles that were taught by Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of people that are so turned off by religion, for many different reasons this happens, that there are certain people that religions just, they don't like it at all, they don't resonate with it, but they do like to practice living by the teachings of Jesus Christ or the Buddha or some of these other avatars from history that were like ascended masters. And so there you have it, 25 reasons why people can stay stuck on Suboxone or other buprenorphine formulations for that matter, even though they want to quit, even though they really like to be off the medicine, really like to be done with treatment. Now you can start to see just how many reasons and good reasons for people to be stuck on the medicine despite the fact that they would rather not be. I'm also sure I've missed some reasons. So now you have the opportunity to post them in the comment box below. What's something on this list that you feel has been holding you back, but you didn't see it on this list? Or what is something on this list, or maybe the top two or three things on this list that you feel are the main top two or three reasons holding you back from achieving freedom from opioid dependence? Also, feel free to give me any feedback on whether or not you'd like to see more of these types of videos in the future. This was a very long format, very detailed information format, and I know these aren't for everybody. I know a lot of people really prefer the videos that are like 5 to 10 minutes, or maybe at the most 15 to 20 minutes. And then anything over that, they will see when they're scrolling or when they're searching. And if it says like 30 minutes or longer, they won't even click on it. And so, yeah, feel free to give me your feedback on anything, what you liked about this, what you were wishing would be on this, but I didn't include. And you could even post a comment on some of the things that you had no idea about until watching this video, and then came to the realization that, oh my gosh, before now it's been invisible to me just how many of these reasons that I have that are actually preventing me from quitting Suboxone even though I want to, or quitting another buprenorphine formulation even though I want to, or quitting another type of opioid even though I want to, or quitting another type of drug or bad habit or behavior that is undesired even though I want to. So that's all from me for now. Matt Finch from opiateaddictionsupport.com, elevationrecovery.com. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.